Jin Park stood in her small repair bay, surrounded by the constant hum of ships and the metallic scent of engine oil. Her workshop sat on the outer ring of Nexus Station, a massive space hub where thousands of vessels from across the galaxy docked daily. Despite being tucked between larger alien repair facilities with fancy equipment and official certifications, Jin's modest shop had been unusually busy lately. She wiped her hands on an old rag, leaving dark smudges across the already stained fabric. Through the large viewing window, she spotted another ship approaching her dock. Unlike the usual transport vessels or personal shuttles, this one gleamed with diplomatic markings, a sleek, angular craft designed for speed and status rather than function. Jin raised an eyebrow. This made 3 diplomatic vessels this week alone. Something strange was happening, but the credits were good, so she didn't complain. The ship docked with a gentle hiss. Its hull shimmered with an iridescent coating that adjusted to the station's lighting. Definitely expensive work. The entry ramp extended smoothly, and Jin stepped forward to greet her newest client. A tall figure emerged, ducking slightly under the doorframe. The Vordaxian diplomat stood nearly 7 feet tall, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting the light into small rainbows across Jin's workshop floor. The elaborate carvings on his outer shell marked him as a high-ranking official, probably an ambassador or senior attaché. "Welcome to Parks Repairs," Jin called out, keeping her tone professional despite her curiosity. "How can I help you today?" The Vordaxian turned toward her voice, compound eyes focusing with an audible click. His mandibles twitched, a sign of either anxiety or excitement in their species. Jin couldn't always tell which. "Are you the human mechanic?" the diplomat asked, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into smooth, accented standard. Jin nodded. "That's me. Jin Park, owner and chief mechanic." She stepped closer to the ship, letting her eyes roam over its elegant lines. The engine vents showed a faint blue discoloration, barely visible, but Jin had been fixing ships since she was tall enough to hold a wrench. "Looks like you've got phase coil issues," she commented casually. The Vordaxian's reaction was immediate. His entire exoskeleton shifted color slightly, turning from deep blue to a surprised violet. His compound eyes widened, and his antennae stood straight up. "How could you possibly know that from merely looking?" he demanded, his translator failing to hide the shock in his voice. Jin shrugged, hiding her amusement. "Aliens always reacted this way. Just a hunch. The exhaust shows a particular color pattern. I've seen it before." The diplomat studied her with new interest, head tilting as his antennae moved in small circles, their way of processing new information. "My ship's diagnostics detected no issues," he said carefully. "I came because of your reputation, but now I see it may be well earned." Jin's curiosity finally got the better of her. "Mind if I ask why you passed 6 qualified Vordaxian mechanics to reach my little shop? I'm not complaining about the business, but there's a whole row of certified repair centers operated by your own species just 2 levels up." The diplomat's mandibles clicked rapidly as he considered his answer. "Those facilities have the latest diagnostic equipment, yes. They employ mechanics who trained at the finest academies on my homeworld." "So why come to me?" Jin pressed, genuinely confused. "I work alone in a converted storage bay with tools I mostly built myself." The Vordaxian stepped closer, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "Word travels quickly among spacefaring species, human. When it comes to ships, your kind is uniquely trusted." "That doesn't make sense," Jin replied, crossing her arms. "Humans are newcomers to galactic society. Most species consider our technology primitive." "Perhaps," the diplomat conceded, "but there are times when the most advanced is not the most reliable." Jin frowned. "You still haven't told me why you're here." "I have an important diplomatic meeting on Centauri Prime in 3 cycles. My ship must function perfectly. There can be no unexpected issues." The way he emphasized those last words made Jin suspect there was more to this story. "But why humans specifically?" she asked. This isn't just about my personal reputation, is it? This has been happening all over the station, all over human space, from what I hear. The Vordaxian's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. You'll see for yourself soon enough. Jin recognized the diplomatic non-answer, but decided not to push further. She gestured toward the ship. Well, let's take a look at those phase coils, then. I'll need to access your engine room. As they boarded the vessel, Jin noticed something odd. The ship's AI didn't announce their entry, and the internal lighting seemed dimmer than standard for diplomatic vessels. Your eye is in low-power mode, she asked casually. A precaution. The diplomat replied vaguely. Some systems are temporarily disabled. The engine room was immaculate and surprisingly spacious for a vessel this size. Jin immediately spotted the access panel for the phase coils and began removing it. Your diagnostic equipment? The Vordaxian inquired, watching as Jin simply used her eyes and hands to examine the components. Jin smiled slightly. Most of it is right here. She tapped her head. The rest is here. She wiggled her fingers. I find computers sometimes miss things that hands can feel and eyes can see. As she worked, Jin became aware of the diplomat watching her intently. Not with suspicion, but with something like hope. Whatever was happening with this ship, he was genuinely worried. Jin carefully extracted the primary phase coil and held it up to the light. There, a hairline fracture, almost invisible, but extending through the crystal matrix. No standard diagnostic would catch it until catastrophic failure. Here's your problem, she said simply. This would have ruptured midway through your journey. Definitely not something you'd want happening during diplomatic talks. The Vordaxian's color shifted to a deep gold. Relief, Jin had learned. Can you repair it? He asked. Jin nodded. I have replacement parts that will work, but there's something you're not telling me. This kind of defect doesn't just happen. The diplomat's antennae went completely still. No, he agreed quietly. It doesn't. Jin ignored the Vordaxian ship's protests as she put away her diagnostic tablet and leaned in closer to the engine housing. The sleek ship was top of the line, with an AI system designed to handle maintenance issues automatically. But Jin had her own methods. This is not standard procedure, the ship's AI complained, its voice cool and slightly offended. Diagnostic protocols require the use of approved scanning equipment. Physical contact with engine components is unnecessary and potentially harmful. Shit, Jin whispered, pressing her ear directly against the metal casing. I'm listening. The Vordaxian diplomat stood nearby, his crystalline exoskeleton shifting colors with curiosity. He had never seen a mechanic work this way. On his homeworld, technicians relied on advanced computers to identify problems. They rarely touched the machinery at all. Jin closed her eyes, focusing entirely on the sounds coming from inside the engine. A soft hum, a rhythmic clicking, and there it was, a faint, irregular whistle that shouldn't be there. She moved her hands across the surface, fingers tracing connection points and seams with practiced precision. The metal felt slightly warmer in some spots, cooler in others. She tapped different components gently with her knuckles, nodding to herself at the varied tones they produced. What is she doing? The diplomat asked his ship's AI quietly. The human appears to be employing primitive diagnostic techniques, the AI replied with what sounded like disdain. These methods were abandoned centuries ago, when more accurate technological solutions became available. Jin ignored their conversation, completely absorbed in her work. She tapped a particular junction and frowned at the dull sound it made. After several minutes of this unusual examination, Jin straightened up and opened her eyes. Your phase coils are misaligned, she announced confidently. But that's not the real problem. There's something wrong with your quantum distributor. The ship's AI immediately objected. Impossible, it stated flatly. All diagnostics show the quantum distributor functioning at 98.7% efficiency. The most recent scan was completed 17 minutes ago. Jin smiled knowingly, not bothering to argue with the machine. She reached for her toolkit and pulled out a simple wrench, not a high-tech instrument, but an old-fashioned manual tool that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a spaceship repair bay. "And that's exactly why you're here, isn't it?" she said to the diplomat. "Because your fancy computers and AIs are telling you everything's fine when your gut says something's wrong." The Vordaxian's antennae twitched in what Jin had come to recognize as agreement. "Continue," he said simply. Jin knelt beside a seemingly solid section of the engine housing. To the untrained eye, it looked like a continuous piece of metal, but Jin ran her fingers along a nearly invisible seam. "This panel doesn't appear on any schematic," she commented as she carefully inserted her wrench into a tiny gap. "There is no access panel at that location," the AI insisted. "You are attempting to breach a sealed system component." Jin ignored the warning and applied gentle pressure with her wrench. With a soft click, a panel popped loose, a panel that, according to the ship's designs, didn't exist. The Vordaxian moved closer, his compound eyes focusing with intensity on what Jin had revealed. Inside was a complex array of glowing quantum circuitry, and attached to it was a small, unfamiliar device. The object didn't match the surrounding technology. It was darker, with a pulsing red light barely visible beneath its surface. "Your diagnostic systems have been compromised," Jin explained, pointing to the device. "This little thing has been feeding false readings to your ship's eye. It's making everything look normal when it's not. In reality, your quantum distributor was about to catastrophically fail." The Vordaxian's exoskeleton suddenly paled from deep blue to an alarmed white. "How did you know to look there? Our most advanced systems didn't detect any anomaly." Jin carefully disconnected the device using insulated tools from her belt. "Human intuition," she replied with a shrug. "We trust our senses more than our computers." She held up the mysterious device, studying it with narrowed eyes. "This isn't a manufacturing defect or a simple malfunction. Someone put this here deliberately. It's beautifully made. It mimics all the right signals while slowly destabilizing your distributor." The diplomat's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of distress. "Who would do such a thing?" "That's the right question," Jin said, setting the device aside in a secure container. "But first, let's fix your distributor. It's been damaged, but I can repair it." As Jin worked, replacing damaged components and realigning systems, the diplomat watched her methods with growing fascination. She used tools in ways they weren't designed for, trusted her ears and fingertips to detect problems invisible to scanners, and occasionally made adjustments based on nothing more than a feeling that something wasn't right. "We Vordaxians pride ourselves on technological advancement," the diplomat commented after a while. "For generations, we've refined our diagnostic systems to detect the smallest errors. Yet you found something our best technology missed." Jin nodded as she carefully resealed connections. "That's because whoever designed this sabotage understood your diagnostic systems perfectly. They knew exactly how to fool your sensors and protocols. But they didn't account for a human with a wrench," the diplomat observed. Jin laughed. "No, they didn't. That's the thing about over-reliance on technology. It creates predictable blind spots. Humans still teach mechanics to use all their senses, not just rely on computers." The ship's AI had fallen silent, perhaps processing the implications of its compromised systems. "Is this why my people now seek human mechanics?" the diplomat asked. "We've detected no sabotage, yet many diplomatic vessels have begun requesting human technicians specifically." Jin tightened a final connection and wiped her hands on her rag. "I think someone's been targeting important ships, and word has spread that humans can find problems others miss. Not because we're smarter or have better technology, but because we work differently." She replaced the hidden panel and stood up. "Your distributor is fixed, and I've removed the sabotage device. Your ship is safe to travel now." The Vordaxian's color deepened to a rich purple, a sign of respect in their culture. "Human intuition," he repeated thoughtfully. "Perhaps there are some lessons the galaxy could learn from your species after all." Jin's small workshop had grown busy over the past weeks. She had hired an assistant, Hoon Lee, a quiet man with gentle hands and sharp eyes. Today, they sat at her workbench, examining the strange device they had removed from the Vordaxian diplomat ship. Hoon turned the device over carefully, studying it under the bright lamp. It was smaller than his palm, with no visible seams or access points. Its dark surface absorbed light rather than reflecting it, making it hard to focus on. "This is the third one this month," Hoon noted, placing it next to two similar devices in a secure containment box. Always different species, always critical systems, always undetectable by standard diagnostics. Jin nodded grimly. She picked up the first device they had found, one removed from a Medusan trade and voice fuel regulation system. Next to it sat another from a Trazarian defense minister's navigation array. "Someone's targeting these diplomats," she said. "The sabotage is too sophisticated for amateurs. Look at how each device is perfectly adapted to the host ship's systems." Hoon pointed to subtle differences between the three devices. "This one mimics Medusan binary code. This one uses Trazarian quantum frequencies. And the Vordaxian one has crystalline computing elements that match their technology exactly." "Whoever's doing this knows these species' technologies intimately," Jin agreed. "That takes resources and access." Jin's repair shop had become increasingly busy as word spread about the human mechanic who found problems others missed. Most clients never learned what she discovered in their ships. Jin simply fixed the issues, accepted payment, and kept quiet. But with each new sabotage device, her concern grew. "Should we report this to station security?" Hoon asked. Jin hesitated. "I'm not sure who to trust. These are diplomatic vessels. If someone's targeting them..." She didn't finish her thought. Interfering in galactic politics could be dangerous for a small-time human mechanic. Later that night, after Hoon had left, Jin was cleaning up her tools when her communication pad chimed. A message appeared on the screen. "Mechanic Park, your discovery has confirmed our suspicions. The Shroud Collective has infiltrated multiple diplomatic vessels. We need your human perception. Meet at Docking Bay 7. The message was signed by Ambassador Ta, a respected Lumidarian diplomat whose trade vessel Jin had serviced 2 weeks earlier. She had found nothing suspicious in his ship, which now seemed significant. Jin stared at the message for a long moment. The Shroud Collective was a name whispered in bars and trading posts, a secretive organization rumored to manipulate galactic politics from the shadows. Most considered them a conspiracy theory. She debated ignoring the message, but curiosity won. Jin grabbed her tool belt. Never go anywhere without tools, her father had taught her, and headed for Docking Bay 7. The bay was in the diplomatic sector, larger and more elegant than Jin's usual surroundings. A sleek shuttle sat in the center, its entry ramp extended. Jin approached cautiously, one hand resting on the stunner hidden in her pocket. "Mechanic Park. Thank you for coming." Ambassador Ta stood at the top of the ramp. His skin glowed with the soft blue luminescence characteristic of Lumidarians, shifting patterns rippling across his smooth features. He gestured for her to enter. Inside, Jin stopped in surprise. The shuttle's interior had been converted into a meeting room, and seated around a circular table were representatives from 7 different species. Jin recognized most of them, clients whose ships she had examined in recent weeks. "Please, join us," Ambassador Ta said, indicating an empty seat. Jin sat down, feeling distinctly out of place in her stained work clothes among the elaborately dressed diplomats. "You found the devices," stated a Trazarian minister, her feathered crest rising with emotion. Jin nodded. 3 so far, all designed to cause catastrophic failures during spaceflight. "There are more," rumbled a massive Krull ambassador, his rocky skin grinding slightly as he moved. "Many more. We believe dozens of diplomatic vessels have been compromised." Ambassador Tay's skin pulsed with urgent patterns as he explained. "Humans are outsiders to our established power structures. Your species only joined interstellar society 30 years ago. Your methods are considered primitive by most standards, But that's precisely why they're effective against advanced sabotage. Jin frowned. I don't understand. Why would being primitive help? A Medusan representative floated forward, her tentacles gently waving. The Shroud Collective has compromised our diagnostic systems galaxy-wide, she explained, her voice a melodic hum. But they haven't accounted for humans and your unusual approach to machinery. For centuries, advanced species have relied on AI diagnostics and quantum scanning. Ambassador Ta continued. We forgot the value of direct observation, of touching and listening to machines. The human approach. It's not just about the tools, added the Trizarian. It's how you think. You don't trust systems implicitly. You verify with your own senses. Jin looked around the table. Why tell me this? Surely your governments have resources to deal with sabotage. The diplomats exchanged glances. The Krull ambassador leaned forward, lowering his gravelly voice. The infiltration may reach the highest levels. We don't know who to trust. We believe the Shroud Collective plans to disrupt the upcoming Galactic Summit, Ambassador Ta explained. If key diplomat ships fail en route, it could prevent critical peace treaties from being signed. Jin suddenly understood the gravity of the situation. The Galactic Summit happened once every 10 years, bringing together representatives from all known spacefaring species. The upcoming summit was set to negotiate resources for several systems on the brink of war. What exactly do you want from me? She asked, though she suspected the answer. We need you to teach others your methods, Ambassador Ta said. And we need you to help us check every diplomatic vessel before the summit. That's hundreds of ships, Jin protested. I can't possibly. Not alone, the Medusan interjected. We've been quietly gathering human mechanics from across the station. 20 so far, all with your intuitive abilities. Jin thought about the sabotage devices in her workshop, about the ships that might be carrying similar hidden dangers, about what might happen if those ships failed during crucial diplomatic missions. The summit is in 3 weeks, she said finally. Even with 20 mechanics, checking hundreds of ships will be difficult. Will you help us? Ambassador Ta asked simply. Jin looked around at the worried faces of the diplomats, each from a species far more advanced and powerful than humans, yet all turning to her in their time of need. I'll need access to your repair facilities, supplies, and security clearance for my team, she said firmly. Ambassador Ta's skin glowed brighter with relief. You will have everything you need. Jin nodded, already planning how to organize the inspections. And I want to know more about this Shroud Collective. If we're going to find their sabotage, I need to understand how they think. You already understand more than you realize, the Medusan said softly. That's why they fear humans. You see what their technology hides. As the diplomats began discussing logistics, Jin thought about how strange it was that humanity's primitive methods had suddenly become their greatest asset in a galaxy of advanced technology. Sometimes, the oldest ways of doing things were the hardest to fool. Jin had never imagined she would stand before the Galactic Council. Yet here she was, a simple mechanic from a small repair shop, facing the most powerful beings in known space. The grand chamber stretched before her, its ceiling lost in darkness far above. 700 council members from 200 species sat in rising tiers, their faces illuminated by the soft blue light of their data screens. The air smelled of various alien scents, some pleasant, others distinctly not, and hummed with the quiet murmur of translation devices. Jin tried not to fidget as she waited for the council leader to call the session to order. Beside her stood Ambassador Ta and the other diplomats whose ships her team had saved over the past weeks. Their presence gave her courage, but she could feel the hostile stares from many council members. In the 2 weeks since her meeting in Docking Bay 7, Jin had led a team of human mechanics in examining over 300 diplomatic vessels. They had discovered sabotage devices in 47 ships, all critical vessels carrying representatives to the upcoming Galactic Summit. As Jin prepared her evidence, A commotion erupted from the Novalian section. Counselor Zren, a tall, thin being with metallic scales, rose to his feet. "This is outrageous." The Novalian counselor's voice boomed across the chamber, amplified by the acoustics. "The council session hasn't even been called to order, yet humans are already on the speaking floor. They cannot be permitted to work on diplomatic vessels. Their methods are unproven. Their security clearances insufficient." Many council members rumbled in agreement. The Novalians were a highly technological species who had opposed human integration into galactic society from the beginning. The council leader, an ancient Tellurian whose stone-like skin bore the cracks of great age, raised a hand for silence. "The emergency session will come to order," she announced. "Ambassador Ta has called this meeting and sponsored the human representative. We will hear them." The chamber quieted. Jin stepped forward to the central platform, trying to keep her voice steady. "Council members," she began, "your advanced diagnostic systems have been compromised for years. The evidence is clear." She activated the holographic projector in front of her. Above the platform appeared a rotating image of one of the sabotage devices, enlarged to show its intricate details. "My team has removed 47 of these devices from diplomatic vessels in the past 2 weeks alone," Jin continued. "Each was designed to cause catastrophic failure during spaceflight. Each was undetectable by standard diagnostic equipment." She projected a new image, a ship's diagnostic screen showing all systems functioning normally, then a photo of the actual damaged components beneath. "The saboteurs aren't just hiding their devices," Jin explained. "They're actively fooling your most sophisticated scanning equipment. They understand your technology so well that they can make you see only what they want you to see." Counselor Zren interrupted. "And we should believe humans discovered what our advanced systems could not. Preposterous." Jin met his metallic gaze directly. "Humans' so-called primitive methods, touching, listening, visual inspection, cannot be hacked or fooled by these devices. Our approach to machinery is fundamentally different from yours." She displayed a video of her team working, humans using simple tools, pressing ears to engine casings, feeling for temperature variations with their hands. "For centuries, your species have refined your diagnostic technology, making it more sophisticated, more automated. But in doing so, you created predictable systems with predictable vulnerabilities." The council chamber filled with offended murmurs, but Jin continued. "Humans still teach mechanics to use all their senses, to develop what we call mechanical intuition. We don't just trust what the computer tells us. We verify it with our eyes and ears and hands." Ambassador Ta stepped forward, his luminescent skin pulsing with emphasis patterns. "The Lumidarian fleet has already implemented human certification for all critical systems. Our safety incidents have dropped by 73%. The Medusan representative floated to Jin's side. "The Medusan Diplomatic Corps confirms these findings. 3 of our vessels were saved by human inspection when our quantum diagnostics detected no issues." One by one, representatives of major species rose to endorse Jin's findings. They shared data, personal testimonies, and evidence of the sabotage their human mechanics had uncovered. Counselor Zren remained standing, his metallic scales now flushed a dark copper with anger. "This is a human conspiracy to infiltrate our most sensitive vessels. They plant these devices themselves to create the illusion of their importance." The accusation hung in the air. Jin felt her face grow hot, but before she could respond, a new voice spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence myself." The chamber fell completely silent. The voice belonged to High Technician Vril of the Algorithmic Ascendancy, the most advanced technological species in known space, and longtime allies of the Novalians. The spindly being rose on hovering appendages, neural interfaces glittering around its sensory cluster. The sabotage devices show signatures consistent with Shroud collective manufacturing techniques. They could not have been created by humans, whose technological capabilities remain limited. Vril's words, though not exactly flattering to humans, undermines Ren's accusation completely. Furthermore, the High Technician continued, I have conducted experimental verification. When our most advanced diagnostic systems indicated all systems functional, human mechanics consistently identified the hidden sabotage devices. Their methods, while inefficient and labor-intensive, proved effective where our technology failed. Counselor Ren sank back into his seat, scales now a pale, defeated gray. Jin stepped forward again. Council members, we don't ask you to abandon your technology. We simply offer a complementary approach, a manual verification system that can't be fooled by the same tricks that compromise digital systems. The council leader's ancient face remained impassive, but her voice carried a note of respect. What do you propose, Mechanic Park? A new certification program, Jin replied. Train human mechanics to work alongside your existing maintenance crews. Develop new protocols that combine the best of both approaches. The council leader considered this for a long moment while the chamber remained silent. Finally, she nodded slightly, cracks in her stone skin catching the light. Perhaps, she admitted, we have something to learn from human mechanics after all. The council will vote on establishing a human mechanical certification program for diplomatic vessels. As the voting began, Ambassador Ta leaned close to Jin. This is just the beginning, he whispered. The Shroud Collective won't stop with diplomatic vessels. They've seen their advantage disappear. They'll adapt. Jin nodded. And so will we. That's the real human advantage. We're good at adapting. She watched as the vote tally climbed on the giant display. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive barely a month ago were now voting to put human hands on their most precious ships. Jin couldn't help but smile at the irony. Sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Galactic Mechanical Institute. The building stood on what had once been a simple airfield outside Seoul, now transformed into the most prestigious mechanical training facility in the galaxy. Ships from 100 worlds filled the surrounding landing pads, their diverse designs creating a striking display of interstellar engineering. Jin Park walked slowly across the stage at the front of the main auditorium. At 42, she looked much the same as she had when she first discovered the sabotage devices 2 years ago, though a few gray strands now appeared in her dark hair. She still wore her work clothes rather than the formal attire expected of an institute director, complete with the tool belt that rarely left her waist. Before her sat 300 students, the inaugural class of the institute. 2/3 were human, drawn from every corner of Earth. The rest represented 30 different alien species, their diverse forms requiring specially designed seats throughout the auditorium. Jin took a deep breath. Public speaking had never been her strength. She preferred the quiet companionship of engines and tools to audiences and ceremonies. But today was important. Welcome, students, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. You're here because the galaxy has recognized something unique in human mechanical intuition. She gestured to the large symbol behind her, a simple wrench against a field of stars, now the official emblem of the Institute. 2 years ago, most advanced species viewed human repair methods as primitive and outdated. Today, the Galactic Mechanic Certification has become the most prestigious qualification a ship engineer can obtain. This was no exaggeration. What had begun as an emergency measure during the Shroud Collective crisis had evolved into something much larger. Every major diplomatic vessel now included at least one human-certified mechanic on its crew. Commercial ships and private yachts soon followed, their owners willing to pay premium rates for the peace of mind that came with human inspection. Some of you have traveled across the galaxy to learn our methods, Jin continued, looking at the alien students. Others, she nodded to the humans, have been selected from thousands of applicants here on Earth. All of you represent the future of interstellar mechanical safety. Jin activated the room's holographic system. Above the students appeared images of the Shroud Collective's sabotage campaign, the devices, the compromised ships, and the eventual capture of several collective agents. The Shroud Collective's infiltration has been thoroughly exposed, Jin explained. Their agents were identified through the human mechanical detection methods we pioneered. What began as a desperate measure in my small repair shop grew into a galaxy-wide operation. She walked to a workbench that had been set up on stage. It was a replica of her original bench from Nexus Station, complete with the basic tools she had used for years. The collective had spent decades infiltrating advanced diagnostic systems. They could make computers see whatever they wanted them to see. But they couldn't fool human senses. They couldn't trick a mechanic who listened to an engine instead of trusting a readout. Jin picked up a simple wrench from the bench. An ordinary tool, nothing special about it except the subtle wear patterns from years of use. This is still our most valuable tool, she said, holding it up. Not because it's technologically impressive, but because it extends the human hand. And the hand is connected to the brain. And the brain can notice patterns that the most advanced AI might miss. She placed the wrench back on the bench and looked out at her students again. We humans aren't the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. Not even close. The algorithmic ascendancy developed quantum computing while we were still using vacuum tubes. The Vordaxians had faster-than-light travel when we were celebrating our first steps on our own moon. A few chuckles rippled through the audience at this. But we found our place in the galactic community. We're trusted because we question, because we use all our senses, because we never rely solely on what the computer tells us. Jin smiled as she thought about how far things had come. 2 years ago, she had been a small-time mechanic on a distant station. Now she led an institute that would shape the future of interstellar travel safety. Your training here will be intense, she told the students. You'll learn to combine the best of human intuition with advanced technology. You'll develop what we call the mechanic's sense, that ability to know something is wrong even when all the readings say it's right. In the front row, Hoon Lee nodded in agreement. After serving as Jin's assistant, he had become the institute's head instructor, renowned for his ability to teach the subtle art of mechanical intuition. Some people ask why we don't simply design better diagnostic systems. Jin continued. Why not create AIs that can't be fooled? And we're working on that too. But there's something about the human approach, that combination of instinct, experience, and healthy skepticism, that no AI has yet managed to replicate. Jin walked to the edge of the stage, looking directly at her students. In the next 2 years, you'll learn to detect problems no scanner can find. You'll develop your senses until you can hear the difference between a healthy engine and one about to fail. You'll learn to feel temperature variations of less than 1 degree with your fingertips. And most importantly, you'll learn to trust those senses when they tell you something isn't right. A Lumidarian student raised a luminescent hand. Director Park, is it true you can identify a ship's make and problem just by the sound it makes during docking? Jin laughed. Sometimes. That comes with experience. And speaking of experience, she pressed a button on her wrist device. The rear doors of the auditorium opened, and 20 humans entered. They were men and women of various ages, all wearing the same type of worn work clothes and tool belts as Jin. These are your primary instructors, the original team from Nexus Station. Each discovered and removed multiple sabotage devices during the crisis. Each has developed their mechanical intuition through years of hands-on work. The students turned to look at the mechanics with newfound respect. Your classes begin tomorrow, Jin said. For now, enjoy the campus, meet your fellow students, and prepare for the most challenging and rewarding training of your lives. As the students began to file out, Jin remained on stage, watching them go. Ambassador Tai approached from the side entrance, his skin glowing softly. A fine speech, Director Park, he said. The council is pleased with the Institute's progress. Jin smiled. 2 years ago, they wanted to throw me out of the council chamber. Times change, Tai replied. As do perceptions. Jin nodded, looking out at the diverse ships visible through the windows. In each of those vessels, human hands would check critical systems, human ears would listen for problems, and human eyes would spot what computers missed. Humanity had found its unique purpose among the stars, not as conquerors or even innovators, but as the guardians of mechanical integrity, the species that all others trusted when failure was not an option. Jin picked up her wrench one more time, feeling its familiar weight. Sometimes the simplest tools were the most powerful, and sometimes the oldest ways were the hardest to fool. The galaxy was learning that lesson, one ship at a time. The end.